Okay, good morning. My name is Jennifer Holland. I'm a special agent with Air Force OSI. I've been an agent for about 20 years now. And so I've worked all throughout the agency, and now I'm doing recruiting with OSI. And we are putting on this information session today specifically to talk to experienced agents. I am recording it, so my hope is that we'll have it available later for other people. Because I do get a lot of requests for recording or transcript of this session. So specifically, just to make sure you're in the right session, we're going to be talking about certain issues and topics that affect our people that are already 1811s or already working as a special agent, as in an active duty role with the Air Force or the Army, but people that have experience with investigations. Next week, on next Thursday, we'll be doing the entry-level information session. So that'll be for anyone who's never been an agent, is brand new to this career field. We've learned that there are a number of different issues depending on kind of where you are in your career. So we separated them in this way. So I will get started. We just have the way the presentation is going to go. I have a few slides to talk about just some general topics that always come up with everybody. And then I'll get through the slides and then we'll do Q&A. And the way that we'll do Q&A, just drop your question in the chat and I'll answer them just in the order they came in. So if a question comes up and you think of it, you can just type it in as we go. You know, don't worry about waiting till the end. I'll just scroll to the top and I'll start from there. So we'll get started. Okay, so I'd like to just cover very, very briefly. Most of the people on the line are either with OSI or previously worked for OSI. You will find a lot of information on our website. So if you have a chance, go and look a little bit more. But the main thing I wanted to point out is that when we do hiring for our experienced agents, we are looking for people in all of these mission sets. And so when you're looking at the vacancy announcement on USA Jobs, which I'll go over in just a moment, remember that we oftentimes will do a broad general announcement, but other times we'll do something very specific. So be careful in what you're applying for, making sure that you're qualified for that thing. So if it's a cyber specific announcement, make sure that you are you have the qualifications listed in the vacancy. We are a full spectrum investigative agency, similar to the FBI and NCIS, where we do counterintelligence and criminal investigative missions, as well as a number of special security services dealing with our SAP programs. So just a very quick overview for those not with OSI. We do have about 3,400 people working for the organization, and I split it out there on this pie chart. You can see the civilian agents are a good portion of them. We have about 11 regional headquarters across the world, but approximately 260 field offices. So we are a worldwide organization. So if you apply to OSI, just know that we have locations everywhere. In the States, overseas, and there's lots of great options, but you may not be able to stay in place. And I'll talk about this more in depth later. So you won't be able to stay in one place forever. Okay, so our recruiting program. We have two ways that we hire OSI special agents. The first way, which is the way we're talking about today, is the experienced agents. We're hiring journeyman, GS-13. We hire at the journeyman level, and oftentimes people say, well, I have this experience on the outside. Can I come in as a GS-14 or a 15? We're evaluating that now. We're thinking about hiring at the GS-14 level, but typically we hire everyone at the journeyman level because we do have a robust promotion system internally. And so we like to promote from within. just as a policy, which I think is a good one, and it helps morale within the organization. So generally, we like to hire at the GS13 level. Our other way that we like to hire folks are entry level, and that's what we're going to talk about next week. So we do hire Palace Acquire, which is in an entry level program through Big Air Force. And then we have a program called Developmentals, where we hire people at the GS7 through GS12 range, kind of depending on what your background is. And this is a little bit more ad hoc. The Palace Acquire happens every year. And then we have a PSIP program, which is an intern program. And that's just for your information. If you want to hear more about those programs, join us next week. All right, so the hiring process, which is why everyone kind of tuned into this, I will get to it. So the hiring process is a multi-step process. And the reason that we have so many steps is that it is quite competitive. So we try and make sure that we're hiring the best people for the job. The first thing that we do is that we ID a need to hire. So we look throughout the agency, see what vacancies we have open. We consult with the program managers and career field managers and senior leaders, trying to decide how many people we would like to fill and what type of specialty. So specifically with the journeyman, this is most important because we'll closely talk to whoever's managing those. So if we're doing an announcement for cyber vacancies or counterintelligence vacancies, we'll talk to them about how many positions are open and what locations. Once we have that information, we'll post that to USA Jobs. We're using USA Jobs now exclusively. We have been for about a year. And you'll see those posted on USA Jobs in two ways. So the ones I just talked about, like a very specific, we're hiring for cyber skilled agents, that's a targeted announcement saying, hey, we need 2 cyber skilled agents to work at our Hawaii office. And it'll be specific, and you apply to it and it'll tell you the qualifications required for that position in the vacancy announcement. So make sure you read it closely. We're looking for people who have certain kinds of training, certain kinds of education. And so we're looking for that primarily. The second kind of announcement you'll see on USA Jobs is more of a broad general announcement where we're saying, hey, we're hiring agents. You could go anywhere. Here's a big list of places you could go, but you know, matching will happen later. So you apply to it, you go through the process, and then we'll talk to you later about your preferences for being for assignments. So after we post the announcement, we'll move to the initial screening. So this is where our staffers, our HR staffers in the office will look through each resume by hand to determine whether they are qualified for the position. Very basic things. So the minimum number years of experience, have you been to CITP? Have you been to any other kind of training that we're looking for? So they're going through that, making sure that you have veteran status if you're older than 37, and I'll talk about that specifically in a minute. And so they're going to tell us whether this person's qualified for the position, very basically qualified. So once they have certified that list to me, we'll go through and we'll do an application review. Basically, this is a board where we get a panel of agents, 3 agents, who will look at your resume and decide whether the resume is what they're looking for in an agent for that position. So all of the resumes will go through that board, basically kind of giving them a rank order. They'll score them, give us their thoughts, and then we'll draw a cut line to call people back for interviews. Now, the cut line is based on how many positions we have open. So if we have 10 positions, we may call back 20 people for an interview. It kind of just depends. Usually it's about 2 people for each position. Oftentimes people will drop out because they found another job, they're kind of job hunting, or just something changed in their family and they couldn't participate in the process anymore. So we'll do the interviews. The same thing will happen. You'll sit with a panel of agents, 3 agents, We do it over Zoom. So you'll have a chance to talk to these agents. They have a list of questions they're going to talk to you about, and then they'll give you a score. So we will compile all those scores from the resume portion, the interview portion, as well as a psychological exam that we'll give to you online. So we'll get those scores plus the vet's preference. If you have that, we'll combine all of those and we'll come up with kind of a final rank order list of the applicants that have made it to the top. We'll send that to our senior leaders for validation, kind of give us the thumbs up and approval. So once that comes back to us, that starts the difficult part. So it's difficult if you apply to a broad and general announcement. It's easy if you apply to a targeted announcement. So if you apply to something targeted, meaning you are a cyber skill person and you apply to a position that's going to be in Hawaii, it's that one location. That's easy. We match you. If you apply to a broad and general announcement, this is the point where I'm going to come to you and say, okay, what are your preferences in terms of where you'd like to be located? And I'll give you a list of what's open at the time, and you'll give me kind of your rank order of the positions you'd like to go to. And then I'll try to start matching based on preference. We do our best just in order of merit. So we'll go from the top to the bottom. Whoever scored the highest gets their first choice if I have it available, and then we keep going. So if we get to the bottom and we don't have yours available and you're close to the bottom of the list, we'll just try and match you with something as close as we can, or something kind of matches your background or resume. And then usually I'll call and talk to you about it. So once you've told me, like, yes, I'll take that job. I love Tinker Air Force Base. I like the mission there. I want to live there. We get the thumbs up from you, then we'll make sure that we do our medical exam and drug testing. And you'll kind of work with our HR staffers to do that. And that's usually done in parallel. But then we'll send your file over to do a suitability investigation. So this is a background investigation that's done, OSI does on each one of their applicants. And this is more than a clearance investigation. If you're familiar and you work for OSI already, you are familiar with these. If you've been out of OSI more than 1 year, you will have to go through a full suitability investigation. If it's been less than 1 year, we have a shorter, or you're still working for OSI when you apply. There's a little bit of a different process. And we talked to you about that once we're doing the matching. So once we get the all clear on the suitability investigation, then we will forward all of your information to AFPC. We'll validate it at OSI, of course, and then they will do the formal selection and placement. So they're the ones that'll send a formal job offer because Big Air Force is hiring you. OSI is just the ones that have validated and said, like, yes, this is the person that we want to hire. So that's how the process works. Typically, the entire process takes about 9 months or so. I think I have this on my next slide. On average, 9 months it takes for us to go through this entire process. And that's just because of all the steps you saw there. We have to have agents look through resumes, and typically we get quite a number of resumes. For entry level, we'll get upwards of 300 resumes for one announcement. And so there's a lot to look through. So the reasons for delays often we'll see are your availability to start. So if you do apply to OSI while you are still working on active duty, you plan to apply and come back as a civilian, and typically you are giving us your availability to start date. So sometimes that doesn't always line up with when we're ready for you to start. So oftentimes we'll wait for people if it's a reasonable amount of time. So that might delay the timeline. You do have to tell us kind of when your commitment is done with the military. So that's the wow statement there. And we'll talk to you about that once you're in the process. But we also have to submit or may have to submit 180-day waiver. So this is a waiver. Basically, the government has said You cannot leave active duty and come right back as a civilian in the same kind of position in a senior role. And they consider GS-13 senior. But for OSI, a GS-13 is a journeyman. And so we've really made our case about that. And so typically these are easy to get through, but we still have to submit a waiver each time to allow you to come back into a civilian role from active duty. We also have to submit age waivers. So if you are over the age of 37, by federal law, we cannot hire special agents into a rigorous law enforcement position over the age of 37. But we're allowed to do it if you have veterans preference. So if you have that, we'll have to write up an age waiver, and that still has to go up through for approval. So these things can kind of delay the timeline a little bit. So when you're planning to apply to OSI, just make sure that you are incorporating all of these things in your planning. Okay, so kind of the best part of it, the types of candidates and the hiring information. So these are just some things that we have put on paper or kind of wanted to make sure that we touched on because we've noticed that a lot of people applying as journeymen, these are things that come up as either questions or concerns. So the first one, make sure that you are submitting your resume and that whatever you're submitting is specific to the vacancy announcement. So if you have a resume and you are very experienced in counterintelligence, make sure you read the announcement and you're not applying for a violent crimes position. So people often just apply to things thinking their resume is going to go into a big pool and OSI will pick it up somewhere. It doesn't work that way. So we put into the vacancy announcement very specific requirements, and then we have to hire to that announcement. So your resume is only good for that one announcement and those positions we're applying for. So if another position opens later and it's a counterintelligence position and you're the best fit, you have to reapply to that position. You have to apply to each position separately. So make sure you're reading what the vacancy announcement is asking for. That's my number one advice. The second question I always get is for people that are currently active duty with OSI and you're retiring or separating. So you must apply through this process that I just described. You have to compete competitively with everyone externally. So we don't do direct hires. There's no active duty civilian program where you can just enter it and you're kind of selected for positions. You compete with everybody who is qualified on USA Jobs. So the next thing I really like to hammer home is invest time in your resume. So this is absolutely the most important document. And the reason it is because it's the first thing that we see from you. We don't get to talk to you. We may not know you. This is way before the interview, but number one, the HR folks are using it to qualify you or disqualify you. So make sure you're specific. Tell them exactly the dates that you've been an agent, when you went to CITP, all the things that are in that vacancy announcement, make sure that's in your resume because they're looking at that to decide if you're even qualified, the very first step. So make sure that's filled out. Use as the full amount of pages that you're allowed. Don't do a one-page resume. That's often recommended. The more the better for the federal government. Along the lines, our HR staffers have told me that try as much as you can to make sure you include each position, comprehensive chronology, meaning as you go through your career, hey, I was here from this date to this date. I had this job from this date to this date. They're trying to calculate how many years you have as an Agent 11 to make sure that you're qualified for this position. So ensure that you design your resume in that way. The other thing we like to point out is that oftentimes people that are retiring or separating will be at an OSI, or we see this with CID as well. They may be at headquarters or region staff, and the last job they had or the last two jobs they had are often administrative in nature, um, or a supervisory position even. Just kind of put that in your memory bank when you're doing your resume, that you don't want your resume to look you don't want to be an administrative investigator. Write your resume to the job you're applying for. So if we're hiring a journeyman who we need to run investigations, we're looking at your resume to see what experience you have running investigations. We're not looking at your supervisory experience. We're not looking at how well you manage a program. We're not looking at any of those other things. We're looking specifically at what cases you've run, how many you've run, what your experience, undercover ops. So be as specific as you can with your investigative chops. So oftentimes people just kind of transfer their EPRs over, and it doesn't play well out, or doesn't play well when you're reading the resume as a reviewer, because it seems like you've just kind of been in headquarters positions. And other times we see that supervisors will make that mistake and they'll say, my team did this, my team did that. That's also hard to judge because we're not really sure what your skills are. So it's fine if you have that. Please include all of those things, but try and beef up the areas where what your skills are. So put those on display. And then demonstrate complex investigations. So one of the things that we're looking for is a journeyman that can drop in, run cases at a debt. So we're looking for your ability to run complex investigations. So talk about kind of the scope of the investigations, who you had to liaison with, or who you had a joint case with. Those things are important, and it'll help your resume, and you'll do better in the resume review portion. 4 years experience is kind of the bottom line to be a GS-13. So if you're thinking about separating, usually people retiring don't have this problem, but if you're thinking about separating, remember that you need to have at least 4 years experience when you're applying back to qualify at the GS-13 level. And this is because this is what our civilians do. So civilians are often hired at the GS-7 level, and they qualify as a 7 based on their education. But then they have to spend a year to make 9, another year for 11, another year for 12, and then another year for 13. So it takes them 4 years of experience to qualify at the GS-13 level. So we're looking at your resume specifically for those 4 years to make sure you can qualify at the GS-13 level. We're also looking for that CITP date. So make sure that you put it in there. And then we're going to ask you for your starting SF50 for other 1811s from other agencies, and your current SF50. And this is just so that we can look at your time as an 1811 and what grade you're at currently. Okay, so the WOW statement. So this is just basically a statement to us telling us when your contract with the government will end. So just be aware that that's going to come up if you do apply before you actually are retired from the military. So we're going to ask you for a statement specifying that date. So your resume should reflect the level of job in which you're applying. So like I said, if you're a journeyman, you're a worker bee. So you're applying to be a worker. Show us what you've got. The next thing I'd say is prepare for the interview. So more times than not, I've sat in a number of these interviews where we have people from OSI who worked for OSI for many years, or from other agencies who don't really prepare or just haven't interviewed before, and are ill-equipped to answer questions on their own resume. So if someone were to say, tell us about your greatest accomplishment, or other questions about how you deal with interpersonal conflict and give us an example. Be prepared for those questions. You can go online and see the different types of questions that we ask. We usually follow OPM guidelines. So prepare for that. Don't, when someone says, why are you qualified? Don't say, well, because I've been an agent for 20 years. That's not an answer. You need to say specifically, because I've run this many cases, I was an undercover agent, I did all these things that make me a good fit for this position. So you are not guaranteed a job. So if you are a current OSI agent and you are applying back as a civilian, there is no guarantee. So you apply just like everyone else externally, and you go through the whole process. Lots of people do not make it all the way through, but like I said, if you follow some of these tips, it'll help you a little bit, because these are things we see with the agents that don't make the cut. And then lastly, mobility agreements. So OSI civilian agents are required to sign mobility agreements, meaning you may have to move sometime in your career. Now, we strive for civilians to stay in place longer. We like for them to stay at least 4 years or 5 years. But your first assignment, you'll definitely be there 3 years. But throughout your career, you may have to move 4 to 5 times, kind of just depending. And we do that for a couple of reasons. We have people overseas that have to come home. And so we need a little bit of movement, but we also want our senior leaders to have some experience in the field in different positions, so they make better leaders. We have lots of civilian leaders in OSI. And we also need to make sure that we can accommodate people who are coming on board with us. So new hires that need positions. So we'll be moving packs into positions. We'll be moving people around for different reasons. Okay, so this is the last part, a little bit about the compensation. So all of our 1811s are on a GS scale. And so you come in as a GS 13. We do have a very good promotion process. So this is one of the questions I get. It's very well defined. We have specific points for different things: education, time and grade, different places that you've been stationed, experience. And so you can submit an application for promotion, and we do hire from internally first. That's our primary place that we like to get people, because we want to promote from within and create some movement within OSI. So we do have that. We do have one SES, and that's the executive director of OSI. So we do, all the positions qualify for elite pay. So that's the law enforcement availability pay. If you're familiar with the 1811s, so that's about 25% of your pay on top of your regular pay. So that's the GS 13 scale on the OPM scale, plus 25% of that pay. If you Google that, you can find a good chart for that. And that's just for your availability. So if you are familiar with law enforcement, you have to work on a Friday night late, or a witness comes in and reports something and it's outside your normally scheduled hours, you have to work that without overtime. So just to mention, but you also get insurance, family support, medical support, and a law enforcement retirement. So you have all the benefits that you would get in another 1811 position, as well as similar to military benefits. Okay, so all of you probably have been through CITP already, but if you have not been through OSI's basic course and you're coming from another agency, you will go to OSI specific course. It's about 7 weeks. And you'll learn all the OSI things that you need to know. So specifically, a lot on UCMJ, kind of updated laws and requirements on sex crimes, indexing procedures, some counterintelligence, intelligence report writing, and more of the OSI databases that you'll need to learn. So you do have to go through that. For anybody that was an OSI agent and maybe coming back to us, we do have a like a 10-day refresher that we're doing online right now. It kind of just depends on how long you've been gone, whether you would qualify for that. Okay, so this is my last slide here. If you go to our website, at the bottom there, you'll find a toolbox of lots of different things. There's a podcast, there's some Q&A, our recorded information sessions are going to go up there. You can also find lots of information on our social media sites. Okay, so that concludes the information portion. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. You can shoot me a link. I'm active on LinkedIn. It's much easier to message people and answer questions there. So I'm more than happy to answer that. But that's the end of our presentation. I'll hang around if anybody has any last minute questions, but thank you for joining us. And please let us know if you apply.